treat I have for you today. Tammy, or Tamara, is an uber popular guide with my affiliate boatbiketours.com, and she joins us to give us the inside scoop on taking a European boat and bike tour. We learn when the best time to go is to see the tulips and the lavender. We learn about the brilliant yellow canola and elegant golden waves of barley, something I wasn't even familiar with. Tammy tells us her top picks for the most beautiful, most historical, the best tours for wildlife, the best for beginners, the most undiscovered trips, and the best all-around tours, and so much more. We're going to delve into what to expect, how to train, and the best times to go on one of these economical, virtually all-inclusive active tours where you only have to unpack once. Don't forget that should you decide to go on one of the boat bike tours, email me for the current exclusive promo code so that you can save on your next boat and bike tour adventure. I can't wait to share my interview with Tammy, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. I'm so delighted to share with you my interview with Tammy. I've asked Tamara to come on the program today to tell us a little bit about adventure travel in particular, boat and bike tours in general, and she's been a guide for, we're going to find out how long, to get some insights from her perspective and also some tips on maybe how we should be choosing our next adventure tours. So welcome to the program, Tamara. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for asking me. Yes, it's a pleasure being here.
I have heard your name so many times from your guests. You're like the superstar guide that everybody's like, oh, I want Tamara's trip. I want Tamara's trip. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into guiding adventure trips, and just kind of give us a little idea who you are.
Yeah. Well, I'm half Dutch, half Italian. I've got a Dutch dad and my mom is Italian. So I grew up bilingual. And I was born and raised in the Netherlands, and I lived in Italy for about 10 years, and I worked there for about 20 years. So I'm fluent in both languages. And my first degree is actually a social degree. So I'm a social pedagogic assistant, so more into social work. And that's where I started working at. And then we kind of rolled into biking, and it's funny to use the word rolling because also with biking you roll. But yeah, we were organizing mountain bike tours in Italy, and but that was only for the summer season, so it was very short. And then I met someone that worked for a company that does boat bike tours. And that sounded very interesting to me. So I decided to contact them, and I started working for the company in about 2012. So I've been doing it now for 12 years. And in the meantime, it's become my full-time job. So from April till November, I only do mostly bike and barge trips. And every now and then a bike in a hotel. But my preference is absolutely bike and barge.
And why is that?
The bike and barge is, I think it's I like the concept very much of the combination of biking and going on the boat. And especially for the guests, if you don't want to ride, you can just hang out on the boat and you can go through locks. Depending on the trip that you're on, you can go through locks, and you still see the world go by, and you still see a lot of the countryside, even if you're not on the bike. And with a hotel trip, you always have to get to the next hotel. So if there's a very windy day, or it's a rainy day, or if you don't feel very well, you either have to ride your bike anyway, or you have to figure out a way of getting to the next hotel. And then you also have to think about, and what do I do with my bike if I'm not riding? And that's what makes the bike and barge very pleasant, because if it's a rainy day, you don't have to ride your bike, and you can just hang out on the boat with a book, or sit up with the captain and see what he's doing all day. And so I think that is also very interesting for the guests.
Very nice. And there's two other things that I like about it. I've done two so far. I've done the Greek Cyclades, if I said that correctly, and also the Croatia split to Dubrovnik that were amazing. Mm-hmm. I like that I only had to unpack once. And then also because we were on the bike and we were on a sailing ship, not a barge, we were able to go places that maybe other tourists weren't there. So you didn't feel like you're in over touristed areas. So I love that about the trip.
Yeah. That's true. You don't have to pack and unpack every day, which is also very comfortable because once you've unpacked, it never gets back into that suitcase.
At least not the pretty
Even though
way.
you didn't buy anything yet. But my experience is that I start unpacking, and for some reason, it never fits back in again. So, and also for a tour guide, it's nice that you don't have to pack and unpack every day. You can do some small laundry on the barge, and while you're riding, the stuff is drying. And in a hotel, it's a little bit more complicated. And I think with the barge, you do get to smaller towns sometimes, and it also depends on the barge because there's bigger ones and smaller ones. But you definitely get to beautiful towns where maybe if you're doing a hotel trip, not always you have the possibility of staying in those towns because there might not be a hotel.
Exactly. And I also remember too in the Greece one, because of the weather, the captain rearranged our trip so that we wouldn't be biking on the windy day and a hard day. You can't do that if you pre-booked your hotels, but he was able
No,
to rearrange
exactly.
our trip. So I completely forgot about that as a benefit. In addition, many of them have e-bikes. So if you and your partner, if you're
Yeah.
traveling together, have different capabilities, like I always rent the e-bike, even though I'm strong, why should I aggravate myself? Or
Yeah.
some people that are hardcore riders may want the manual bike. It evens the playing field a little bit and makes for a better experience for partners that may not be at the same level.
Yeah, you see it more often, more and more e-bikes, and more often, especially this year, I heard more often, like you said, I just don't want to, tire myself out so much. I could ride a regular bike, but I'm on holiday and I just like to relax. So very often I heard that reason this year for people getting an e-bike instead of, oh, I'm not comfortable, I'm not capable. So it was more a choice of more, yeah, being more relaxed.
Exactly. And with the e-bike, you are still pedaling, you are still working, just not as hard.
Exactly. Yeah.
And on the Greek one, I believe it was 7 people did the e-bikes and 5 did the manual. Every one of the manuals had wished that they had gone to the e-bikes by the end of that trip. Something for
Yeah,
people to
it's a
think
bit.
about.
Yeah, well, I also would not like trips to become e-bike only. And some of the trips are becoming e-bike only at the moment. And that is, yeah, to have the same level for everybody in the group. Personally, I like that much less, but that is because if the whole group has e-bike, then I have to go on an e-bike too. And I'm not ready for that yet. I just like to use my legs and I like to be on a regular bike still. And so I also like the combination, like the different people that you have in the group, some on the regular bike and some on the e-bikes. And if there is a hill and you have people on regular bikes, you can really encourage them that they can do the hill. Yeah, come on, you can do it, you can do it. And then the satisfaction that they have when they get on top of the hill is yeah, I think is priceless. And if I see people coming up that hill and they're so happy because they did it on the regular bike, that makes it a lot of fun for me. I also understand why a lot of people are going towards the e-bike and not necessarily because they're not fit enough, but more because they just want to relax a little bit more while they're doing the bike trip and they don't want to be that exhausted. So I also understand that point of view, but I'm still getting used to that.
Right. And I, like I said, I did it because I didn't want to be the one that couldn't get up the hill. And a lot depends on the terrain of where you're going. I mean, in the
Absolutely.
Netherlands, where I guess you're based, I mean, it's pretty
Yes, yes.
flat, right? So
Yeah.
that's more just a convenience more than a necessity. Whereas there were some pretty high mountains that
Oh,
those folks had to
yes.
go up in Greece.
Yeah, especially Greece and Croatia. There's quite some big hills there. In the Netherlands, we don't have the hills, but we do have the headwinds. And that is almost as going uphill.
Okay. And I hadn't considered that. So you've, according to the list you've given me, you've guided, it looks like well over a dozen trips. Of the trips that you guide, what are some of the easier and the harder? And just kind of go through some of the places that you're regularly guiding to kind of give us an idea of the kinds of trips
Mhm.
that people can do.
Well, the most easy, I would say, would be the pretty much all the tours in the Netherlands, although you could have the headwinds, of course. But yeah, you can never predict the weather. The bike and barge in Italy, from Mantua to Venice is also completely flat, so it's very easy. Those are the trips that are really flat and therefore easy. If you go to France, especially the Provence, but also the trips in Burgundy and around Paris, the Champagne area, that is already quite some more hills there. So it's a bit more challenging. And I think they actually made the Burgundy and the Champagne routes now e-bike only. So it's a bit more comfortable for the people. On the Mosel, every now and then you could have some small uphills. I like personally, I like the ones with hills in it, but because, well, people ask me very often which one is your favorite, and I don't really have one favorite tour that I'm like, oh, that is absolutely the best one, of the most beautiful one. And I think they all have something very, very unique. Like the tulip tours, you can only do them in April and May. You cannot do a tulip tour in August because there's no tulips then. So that's what makes the trip very unique. Amsterdam to Bruges is beautiful because you start in one big city, and then ending in Bruges, you go way back in time, centuries even, with the housing. Like the houses in Amsterdam, yeah, they had the golden age in Amsterdam was in the 17th century, whereas in Bruges it was in the 14th century. So there's a very big cultural difference, which is really interesting and very beautiful. The ones in France, I like all of them because of the hills and because of the French countryside with the lavender, with the sunflowers or the barley fields. This year, I actually did Friesland trip for the first time, and that is in the northern part of the Netherlands. And that is absolutely in my top three, mostly because it's very remote. So it's way up in the north of the Netherlands. So it's remote. It's not so crowded. Also, the cities, even though it's maybe 100,000 people or 120,000 people, but still it's not so overly crowded as it is in the western part of the Netherlands.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's an area I know absolutely nothing about. So maybe we can get somebody from that went on one of your trips to come on the show and tell us about it.
Yeah.
So great. So if somebody wants to specifically see some things like the tulips, would you say March or April, or can you narrow it down to like the middle of March? Like when would you tell people their best shot of seeing like peak tulips would be?
For tulip season, we offer the tours starting usually either the last weekend of early April, and then we finish usually around the 13th of May. But my recommendation would be, and then probably those are the weeks that are already fully booked, of course, but the best time to see the tulips would be the second half of April. So I would say after the 20th of April and then going into early May. That is the best period to see also the tulip fields. And if you come early April, for example, it really depends on the weather in the winter, whether we've had a warm winter or whether we've had a very cold winter. This year, people in the first week of April were very lucky because we already had quite some fields because our winter was very warm. So the flowers started blooming earlier. But usually in the beginning of April, you see the fields of daffodils and the hyacinths. And then starting from the third week of April, we get the tulip fields. And then you have all the flowers. So you have the daffodils and the hyacinths and the tulips and all those colorful rows of flowers. It's really, really pretty. And I actually started to appreciate it much more once I started guiding these trips. And I grew up in the tulip area, and I remember when I was a little girl that every time people were coming there and they were riding their bikes or the buses of people were coming and they were all taking pictures. And I was like, oh, why are they coming? What is so beautiful about these flowers? And, you just don't see it, especially as a kid. And then I started guiding these trips, and now I totally understand and I really appreciate it. And I actually enjoy it much more myself, too. And I still live in the tulip area. So everywhere around my house, I have these fields of flowers, colors, and the hyacinths, they also smell very strongly. You smell it from a mile away. And yeah, it's really so beautiful. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, just a little aside. I've not been to the Netherlands, and I do want to do this trip. So it's sold out next year. Maybe we can do something for the year after. A,
Hmm.
a Dutch community moved over to Eastern North Carolina, and I was looking for real estate, and I didn't know anything about this community. And I happened to get there right when their fields were in bloom, and I just never saw anything like it, and I wasn't expecting it, and it's just breathtaking to see as far as the eye can see blooms. It's
Yeah.
amazing. So if
Yeah.
somebody's into flowers, this is something you want to encourage somebody to do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the tulip fields, they're only for a short time. And that has to do with energy of the tulip. That as long as the real flower is there, all the energy goes into the flower. But most growers, they grow the tulips for the bulbs. The bulbs are way more important for the growers. So that's why after only a couple of days of blooming, they cut the heads.
Mhm.
So and then I always say it looks like a battlefield. You see all these chopped off tulip heads, and you're like, oh, why would you do that? It's so beautiful.
Yeah,
And it's really because it's all about the bulb.
right.
So the hyacinths and the daffodils, you see them like forever. They stay on the fields all the way till they're completely gone. But the tulips, it's really just a short time. So yeah, sometimes it's only 1 week or maybe 2 weeks that they have them in the fields. And the best chance for that is the second week of second half of April.
Got it. Got it. Now, how about the lavender? Is that just in Provence in France, or is that in other areas? And when's the best time to see those?
The lavender fields, I saw them in late June, early July in the Provence area. So if
Okay.
you're doing the bike and barge in the Provence that goes from Avignon to Aigues-Mortes, which is on the Mediterranean, in that area, there's some possibilities of seeing the lavender, but it's usually end of June, July.
Very cool. Now you mentioned barley. Now I wouldn't have thought that'd be something. Is it just the waving of the? I guess it's like a grass in the wind, or what makes the barley special? And when and where would we
Yeah.
see that?
Well, I don't know if you've heard if you know the song "The Fields of Gold"
Mm-hmm.
and "The Fields of Barley," and that is really what it looks like. And especially in France, you have these rolling hills that are completely covered with barley, and then it's just how do you say that, waving in the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the sun on it, it really looks like fields of gold, like in the song. And that's what I really like from the barley fields. And also in the northern French strips, you also have the fields of canola, which is bright, bright yellow, and the sunflowers, of course.
And so when would we want to see the barley, and when would we like to see? I think I saw the canola in England,
Yes.
or it
Yeah.
was something that was just like a just a in your face yellow, like
Yeah. It's very
so.
bright yellow.
Yeah, very
Exactly.
bright. So maybe that's what it was. So when would we want to see the canola? When would we want to see the sunflowers? And when would we want to see the barley?
All of them actually. July and August is a good opportunity. Canola, I also saw some canola in June. But the sunflowers and the barley mostly in the summer season.
All right, great. Now, I've only done the sailing ship. So I had a two-mast ship, although
Okay.
we motored the whole time, even though we had the poles for the sails for the sailboat. Tell us what's the difference or pros and cons between the barge and the sailing. Just talk a little bit about that and what the accommodations are like inside inside the ships.
Uh-huh. In fact, different ships. So we have the sailing ships. We've got the motor ships or the passenger ships. And within the passenger ships, we got the really big ones, like they go on the rivers, take up to 120 people. And then you have the smaller motor ships that used to be cargo ships and then have been converted into motor ships or into passenger ships, and they can take like between 20 and 40 people depending on the different sizes. Like if you go to northern part of France, also the Provence, they have a maximum of 20, maybe 24 people on the barge. If you choose the tulip tours, for example, pretty much all the ships are offering the tulip tours. So the sailing ships, and they hold usually 24 people. the smaller motor ships, so 20 people or 40 people. And then you have the bigger cruise ships that are 70, 80, or maybe 100 people. But the bigger ones are usually semi-guided. So there is one guide on the boat, one or two guides. They give a briefing in the evening, but then the next morning everybody rides on their own. So in Holland, in the Netherlands, we have the number system where you can follow numbers from one place to the other. So we give all the numbers and you just follow those numbers, and you see the numbers on posts along the tour. And you can just make your own way, and you can get back to the boat whenever you like. You can have your coffee whenever you like, and lunch, and all the stops you like. And the tour guide is also on the ride, and if you need him, you can call. So if you have a flat tire, or if you're lost for whatever reason, you can call the tour guide, and they come for help. That is semi-guided. What I usually do, or what I actually only do, is fully guided. So I'm more like a mama duck with all the ducklings in the back. So I ride in the front, and then everybody is following. That's what we call fully guided. And then usually we have a long ride and a short ride. So if there's two tour guides on the ship, one tour guide is doing the long ride and the other one is doing the short ride. So the people can choose every day. And on the sailing ships, it's very often only one tour guide. And then the tour guide, of course, decides whether you're doing the long or the short. And that is usually based on what you see during the day. Sometimes I decide to do a short tour because the cities that we visit that day are very important visiting, or are interesting to visit. And then I would like to have the guests some more time to explore. And if you do the long route, then maybe you only have like half hour in that city. So that is usually what my decision is based on what we see during the day. The accommodation on the barges, you always have your own room with your own bathroom. So you have your own privacy. Usually it's twin beds. Not very often there's single rooms. Most of them are double rooms or twin rooms. Then you have the dining area where everybody comes together for breakfast. You make your lunch package usually, and then in the evening you have your dinner in the dining area. And then depending on the ship, you also have like a sitting area, or lounge room, where after dinner you can hang out, where you can sit with others, or you can hang out and read your book. Some barges also have a sun deck, either in the front or in the back, or sometimes even on the top, depending on how big the boat is. Then the sailing ship, definitely the ones that we have in the Netherlands, the sailing ships and the Magnifiques ships, they have a jacuzzi for the guests.
Oh, very nice.
That is, yeah, especially during tulip season, or if you have a rainy day on the bike, and then you come back, and then after dinner or after the bike ride, you can just hang out in the jacuzzi and warm up a bit.
Very, very nice. And you mentioned the food. Now, on my 2 trips, the food I thought was outstanding. Can you talk?
Mm-hmm.
Is it good on all the ships, or are there some that just talk about the food a little bit?
No, I think the food is good on all the ships, and the menu varies a little bit. There are some specific things like lasagna, for example. And of course, being half Italian, I think Italian food is the best in the world. And the lasagna does very often comes back on all of the ships. But then, they try to do vegetarian, fish, meat. They try to do local dishes. So if you're in France, on the trips in France, you get a little bit more French dishes. If you're in Italy, then of course you get the Italian dishes. In the Netherlands, some of the ships, they do offer the typical Dutch stampot, but you don't get it very often, I have to say. And the stampot, I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's mashed potatoes with vegetables, and usually either a sausage or a meatball in it, and that is all mashed together. Because stampot comes from stampen, and stampen is to mash. So like a mash pot, and then put everything together. And you can do it with the potatoes, and then onion and carrots, or with endives, or with chicory, or with another cabbage. Kind of, yeah.
Very nice.
That's a typical Dutch thing. but you don't see it they don't offer it very often. And yeah, I don't know why. Maybe they think it's not fancy enough,
Yeah.
maybe.
I don't know. And I did notice because we had somebody with allergies and somebody that was gluten free, and they were able to accommodate all the different diets, which I
Yes.
thought was very kind.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
very nice.
You see more and more intolerances and allergies, and that is very important for the people, for the guests, when they book the trip, and when they do mention these things, that there's really a difference between not liking something and really being allergic or having an intolerance, because it's very difficult for the
The
chef.
chef. Hmm.
Yeah, and especially nowadays with gluten, with lactose, onions, and vegan. Vegan is a bit more complicated. Vegetarian food is on every ship doable. Vegan is not always doable. So that really depends on the ship. And yeah, and for the guests, it's really important to mention if it's really an allergy, then of course we have to take really good care of it. But sometimes they also mention things, and then
Now, I remember a story about somebody had said they were whatever, one of the things. And then the last day, I think it was vegetarian, they ordered a steak. And like, why are you eating a steak? Oh, it's my off day. And
yeah,
they're trying to cook in these teeny little rooms. You don't even know how they were able to produce all the food in the galley. Is that what they call whatever wherever they're the little kitchens in the ships are teeny. So yeah, please be respectful of the chef and all the aggravations. Okay,
yeah.
so let's talk a little bit about the paths or the roads that we're going on. What can people expect, and is it a big variance between which tour that you go on? I was on quiet country roads most of the time. Are some of the other tours strictly on bike paths, or talk about that because I don't know outside of my two experiences.
Yeah. Well, we always try to find quiet roads, quiet back roads or quiet country roads. And then it really depends on the country. I think bike path wise, the best country to be in is the Netherlands. Absolutely. I think we have, I don't know how many thousands of kilometers of bike paths. And that is really beautiful. And that makes it also very easy. So if you do any tour in the Netherlands, I would say it's really a big percentage only on bike paths. Of course, every now and then you have to cross the street, or you have to just do a little bit on maybe a traffic road. But even on traffic roads, there's either a bike lane or a bike path next to it. You hardly ever ride on a big traffic road in the Netherlands. But you do ride on very trafficy bike paths, because we have 17 million people in the Netherlands, and I think we have about 30 million bicycles.
Right.
And everybody goes to work or school with the bike. And so you got the trailers, and we got the e-bikes and the pedelecs that are even faster, and the step bike, kids bikes. And you see so many different kinds of bikes here on the bike paths. And that's what sometimes makes it a little bit confusing, I think, especially for people coming from the US mostly. Like Germans are a bit more used to riding in the traffic, and people from North America are less used to riding in the traffic. And also with other bikers, of course, that can be very interesting. But like when we're riding and we're going into Amsterdam, a lot of people freak out. We go, oh, we're going to ride into Amsterdam. But really, from where we enter the city to where the boat is, it's all on bike path. All of it is on bike path when you're crossing the city of Amsterdam. But there's, yeah, a lot of people on the bike path too, because they're walking or riding their bikes, and they want to go home. They want to go to work. If you're in Belgium and Germany, they also have quite a lot of bike paths. I think on the Mosel we only had bike paths, really only short passages that were not on bike paths. So Germany is also very good. France, much less. In the Provence, they've made a few newer bike paths 1 or 2 years ago, so that improved the tour very much. Around Paris, it's mostly back roads or country roads, and then we always try to find the roads that are not so trafficy. Also, Italy, same thing. We have a lot of bike paths actually on the Italy trip, because we follow the Po River, and there's a beautiful bike path along the Po River.
Got it. Yeah. And on my two, we were on quiet country roads that on the rare occasion when a car came back. So you'd yell out car front, car back, and we would all just make sure we were in a single line. It was never an issue. I never felt scared. Let's put it that way.
No, exactly. I think that is a very important thing to always ride in single file to pass on the warnings. I always use the corner system. And with the corner system, I'm in the front and I assign one person to be the sweep for that day. And then every time I need to make a turn, whether it's to the left or to the right, or maybe at a junction where we cross, I ask the person that is riding behind me to stop at the junction and tell everyone to go in the right direction. That is called the corner system. And really, all the guests that have been on my trips, they are all very excited about that system. Some have taken it back to their country and they're using it now in the Toronto bike rides. And because it's also, it gives a very safe feeling. That if you're approaching a junction and maybe you don't really see exactly the one in front of you, or you see that there is a little gap, if you see that someone of your group is standing there at the junction telling you, oh, you have to go left here, it gives some safety to the people and they are also more relaxed. Whereas if you're in busy streets and there's a lot of cars and buses and maybe they also have to keep track on where everybody in the group is going, that can cause a lot of stress. And with using the corner system, they don't feel that stress. So that is a system that I never go without. I really like it.
Yeah. That they use the same on my two trips too, because sometimes you will get
Oh, good.
spread out and
Yes,
you don't see
exactly.
the people in front and behind. So it gives you that comfort and that confidence that, yeah, I got this. I can do this.
Yeah, exactly. It gives more. Yeah, it's less stressful if you because especially if you have a big group, if you have 20, 25 people, it's really normal that it can stretch out because there's people riding a little bit faster, others like to go a little bit slower, or they like to have quite some distance between each other, which on one hand is good. Usually I say about 1 or 2 bike lengths difference. Some people prefer to have more. And then you can create some gaps, but by using the corner system, that's okay. And then I always regroup at a point where I think, okay, this is safe. This is big enough where I can regroup with 20 people. And then when we regroup, everybody okay? Yeah, okay, good. And then we continue. So I think that's just a very safe system.
Perfect. So let's talk a little bit about how you think people should prepare for their trip. How should they train? Or my big thing for me is my legs are strong because I'm a big hiker. It was getting my rear end or my fanny used to sitting on the saddle for usually it's I
Yeah.
would say half a day, 4 hours, 5 hours maybe with breaks.
Yeah, exactly. I think that part is the most difficult one because legs, if like you say, if people are runners, they run marathons, and even if they don't, but they do hike, then the legs is fine, but it's usually the sit bones where the biggest problems are. And yeah, the only way to train for that is to ride your bike and to ride as much as possible. And very often and really it's I don't want to say it happens every week, but okay, I do about 18 weeks in the summer. At least half of my tours, there's people on the tour that say, oh, I haven't ridden my bike in 10, 12, 30 years. And then I'm really like, okay, this is going to be a very interesting week for you then. Because of course, after the first day is okay, but then on day 2, or especially on day 3, they start feeling their sit bones or worse. And yeah, so if you're planning on doing a bike trip where you ride your bike 6 days in a week, I would definitely recommend to start riding your bike. And also look at the distances that you have to do for your trip. So if you see that you have long distances, you have 40-mile rides maybe, or even 50-mile rides, then make sure that at least once or twice you have done that distance. Because it's one thing to ride your bike, to ride, I don't know, 15 or 20 miles once a week. And then you come here or wherever you're doing the tour, and then you have to ride 20, 24, 30 miles every day. And that's a very big difference. And then maybe your legs are up for it, but yeah, but the sitting part, not so much. So that is really what people should train more. And not only on a stationary bike, go out on the bike paths, but yeah, if you go to Europe, very often you're going to have to deal with traffic, with other people on the bike paths. I've had people from California that had really tried, yeah, they worked out and they went to the gym and they had ridden on the bike paths and they had ridden, I don't know, 15 miles a couple of times a week, but it was really only on the bike paths. So it was 7.5 miles in one direction, and then they turned around and did 7.5 miles in the other direction, which is very good for exercising your butt, but you don't have any traffic with that. And I also understand that and I completely can relate to that the the traffic in North America is very different from the traffic in Europe. In Europe, the cars are way more um, tolerant towards bikers, and as I've heard in North America, that's really not the case. So I also understand why you don't want to ride into the traffic. But that is, I think, also something that you can just learn when you're here on the tour and when you're following a tour guide. What I also sometimes do, if I see that someone has really issues in the traffic, I just tell them to ride right behind me, and then of course they're not the corner person, but so they can just follow me right by my side, and that gives them more comfort. So it's less stressful if we do it that way. But especially the sit bones, yeah, that is the most important thing that people need to train.
Right. And we're going to get a little bit more into choosing trips, but if somebody is uncomfortable around the other bikes, they're like that was a zero issue on my trip. So I think your tour choice, which we're going to get into a little bit later, will help you kind of pick the right trip for you. So on my, I guess it was the Croatia, I brought a padded seat, which I left behind for the next person, and padded shorts. And that helped because, like I said, it's just hard to condition your rear end if you're not used to it. So that
Exactly.
is super, super important, everybody.
Yeah. Padded shorts, I would definitely recommend padded shorts. Yeah.
So let's talk
Exactly.
about the
Yeah.
guests. What would you say the average age of your guests are? And are they from all over the world? Or are they, because you're a European based company, just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that the average age at the moment is between 65 and 70, but the age is going down a little bit. And I think it's also that the 60 plus, the people that are 60 plus now have more free time to do trips like this, and they still have the money to do trips like this. Whereas the younger generation, it's still a bit more complicated, or they like to go with their peers, or they go with the family, because of course very often they still have smaller kids when they're in their 30s or in their 40s maybe. So then they do family trips. We don't see many families on the barges. It happens every now and then, and yeah, I don't think it's always very nice for the kid. I mean, if you have a full boat of all 60 plus people, and then there is one kid of 11, yeah, I don't know if that's a lot of fun for the kid. It depends. If it's on a sailing ship, it's also different, because on the sailing ship there's a lot to do also for the kid. You know, he can help the sailor, he can help the captain, he can help raising the sails, and so that's a lot of fun. If you have a group of kids, like if you are two or three families traveling with little kids, so they at least they have each other to play with, then it's absolutely different. And then it depends on the kid whether he wants to, whether he can participate in the ride. The kids need to want it. Like, if it should not be the parents that say, oh, you have to do this bike trip, because that won't work with a 12 or 13-year-old. You know, they really have to want to ride their bikes.
I don't think we had, well, I know we had no children on mine. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you can book the whole ship if you go ahead, if you do it far enough in advance. And so you could get a couple families together and
Yeah.
So that might be the solution for that, because this is really geared
Absolutely.
towards more mature people. And
Yeah.
now I believe I'm correct in that the guides speak at least English and German. So
Yes.
if you speak English and or German, you're fine there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. English is a must. And well, German is absolutely the second must. And then every other language you have is a bonus. Of course, especially France, if you want to work in France. The guests come from all over the world. I would say the biggest part comes from North America, and then Germany. I think we have less people, for example, from France or Spain or Italy. Italians tend to go in a fully Italian group instead of going in an international group. And then
We had
sometimes we have people from the Scandinavian countries,
we had
Aussies,
yeah,
Kiwi.
Aussies and Brits.
Yeah,
Yeah, just a fun group of people, very well traveled, very energetic. These are doers.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're not just sitting in a tour bus and getting out, taking a picture and getting back on.
No,
They're
no,
out
no, exactly.
physically
No,
doing something. These are fun
yeah,
trips. And
absolutely. And you're on holiday, so most people are also very happy.
exactly. And I found them to be pretty affordable too, because it's almost all inclusive. You do have, when you're in certain fun towns, you might have a meal on your own so you can pick wherever you want to eat, but
Yeah.
almost everything's included. So you kind of know what your vacation is going to cost, which I thought was great.
No, absolutely. And usually on most of the trips, there is one night where you have dinner out, where you don't have the dinner included. And it is, yeah, usually we try to find a city for that where you have a lot of options, of course, to have your dinner out. And then at breakfast you have a possibility of making your own lunch, so you can get packed lunch, and that can be sandwiches. There's some ships where they provide salads for your lunch, and then you have a little box to put it in. But if we are in towns where I know that you can buy food, I always recommend that too. Like if we are in a beach town, for example, or if we are doing the Friesland tour. I mean, if you're traveling in the Netherlands, you have to have herring, for example, or the poffertjes, which is the tiny little puff. They look like tiny, tiny little pancakes, which is a typical Dutch thing. Herring, the salted herring, is also very typical, or the kibbeling, which is the deep fried codfish, and things like that. I'm a foodie, so if I'm on my trip, if I'm guiding my trips, I always try to bring people. I take them either to the restaurant or to the kiosk where they can snack and where they can try the local things. Yeah, they
Exactly.
never lose weight on my trip.
And one thing too, we should mention that these aren't like the Bataan Death March on a bike. You are stopping and looking at historical things. You might stop for a coffee or a snack or to check out
Absolutely. Yeah.
something of local interest. So
Yeah.
it's a pleasure ride with many, many stops along the
Oh,
way.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that is, of course, also if you're not used to riding a lot and your rear end is going to hurt. Yeah, a typical day would be 8 o'clock is breakfast, 9 o'clock we start riding our bikes. Usually we ride for about an hour and a half, and then we have a coffee break. And then, of course, if you're in the Netherlands, you have to have it with apple tart, with the apple pie. If you're in France, you can go to the bakery and get the eclair. In Italy, you go for the croissants. So always something with, it's not compulsory, of course, but at least once a week, I tell them to try one of those things. So then we have the coffee break. Then we ride typically for another hour and a half again, and we stop somewhere for lunch. And sometimes it's just a picnic, half-hour picnic lunch. Can be in a forest, can be in a park, it can be also in a little town. If it's in a town, I try to give a little bit more time so you can also walk around a little bit. And then in the afternoon, after an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours of riding, if possible, I try to stop again and then maybe have either another coffee break, or if the weather's really good, we can stop for a beer or for gelato. And then you ride again, and then between 4 and 5, we're usually back on the boat.
Right. And you mentioned beer. So alcohol is available on the boat, but that's additional purchase. And you just pay the captain at the end of the trip. At least that's what we did in ours.
Yeah. That is,
Yeah.
on all the barges, it's the same. So yeah, there is a bar bill. Oh, some have a service bar, others have a self-service bar, and then there's the ticking system. So you can you just tick it on a list and take what you had for drink, and then at the end of the week they will calculate, and then on the last evening you pay for the bar bill.
Right. And I found they weren't gouging us. I thought the prices were quite reasonable.
Oh yeah, it's
So,
absolutely
yeah.
reasonable.
So let's talk about the different types of tours in particular. So somebody said, Tamara, which would be the top 3 historical boat and bike trips I should consider?
Well, historical, I would say Amsterdam to Bruges, the Hanseatics, which is in the eastern part of the Netherlands. Very old cities, all about from the Middle Ages. So that is a lot of history there. Also on the tulip tour. On the tulip tours, you have the flowers, but you also have a lot of interesting cities.
Gotcha. Now, if somebody says, "Oh, what are the 3 prettiest tours?"
I think the northern islands in the Netherlands. There's a lot of nature there, a lot of water, a lot of nature. The Provence, I like the Provence with the nature, especially in the southern part. Yeah, most have nature combined with cities or smaller towns. So I don't think there's one that is really only nature, for example.
Mhm. If you wanted to see the most animals, which ones would you think? Like, whether it's birds, a lot of people are birders, or if they just want to see more wildlife, which ones would you steer them towards?
Yeah, the Provence, 'cause there's a lot of birds there, but also the flamingos, the wild horses, the bulls you have there. So yeah, the Provence, absolutely. For bird watching, the islands again. So the Frisian Islands. That is a semi self-guided tour, so no tour guide on the boat. It's on a sailing ship, but you have a lot of islands, and because of that, it's rather remote, and therefore a lot of birds.
If somebody was interested in being on the quietest, like the most off the beaten path, the less crowds, which ones would you steer them towards?
Definitely Friesland. Friesland is off the beaten track. For riding, also bike and barge in Italy, except for for Venice, because you go to Venice, so that is very crowded. But the rest of the trip is also rather calm. It's pretty quiet. So not too many people also on the bike paths. Like in the Netherlands, it's busy on all of the bike paths. And Burgundy and Paris to Montargis, not so many people. So
Got
it's
it.
also beautiful trips.
And which would you recommend as the best mix of food, culture, and beauty, like the best package?
Italy.
It does have the best food. I didn't have one bad meal anytime I've ever been there. Not one.
Yeah, exactly. No, Italy is definitely food wise. Yeah, I love Italian food. And there's a lot of culture in Italy. Yeah.
Nice.
A
And
little less nature maybe on
mhm,
that trip, especially except for the part around Venice where you have the delta, which is very interesting. But yeah, culture and food, but food is really good on all the trips.
exactly.
Yeah.
And for first timers that have maybe they've never taken an adventure trip in their whole life, which
Hmm.
1 or 2 or 3 would you say, hey, you ought to think about doing this if you want to dip your toes into trying adventure travel?
Yeah, I would start with a flat one for sure. So either Mantua to Venice in Italy, or the Tulip Tour, or Amsterdam to Bruges.
Gotcha. And then which tours do you find, and this is my last one of these, unless you have some others to add, are you would consider undiscovered? It sounds like the Friesland might be one of those
Yeah,
that people don't even
absolutely.
think to consider, that are great trips that they just don't even know about.
Yeah. Well, the Hanseatic cities, in the eastern part of the Netherlands. People don't go there because when they come to the Netherlands, everybody goes to Amsterdam, to The Hague, to Rotterdam, to Haarlem, but they never go to the eastern part of the Netherlands, and that is really beautiful. And same with Amsterdam to Maastricht. I've never done that tour before, but it's absolutely off the beaten track and away from where all the tourists go. The Mosel is very touristy, I would say, because it's pretty crowded. It's a beautiful trip, absolutely, but it's more crowded, and definitely the tours in around Paris are not so crowded.
Gotcha. Now, we have covered a lot of these trips on the podcast. I'll put links in the show notes. But when you mentioned the Hanseatic, our guest for that show said that I think they'd been on 7 boat and bike trips, and it was the wife's favorite trip out of all of them.
Okay. Yeah. I can imagine that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, last question before we kind of close out. Would you recommend people go in the shoulder season or high season, or how about picking their timing if they're not trying to specifically see the tulips or the lavenders or something? When would you suggest is the best time to try to book?
Yeah, that really depends on where you're going. If you're going to the Provence, I would definitely not go in July and August because that's too hot. So the Provence is very good in April, May, and September, and also October. It's very good for the Provence. For some reason, people don't see the Provence as a very hot place. So they don't go to Italy, for example. They don't go to Venice in August because it's too hot. But they do go to the Provence in August, and the Provence is further south than Venice, so it's even hotter there. So that is important to keep that in mind if you're traveling to the Provence. Of course, Italy can be very warm in July and August. So I would also recommend earlier in the season. For the Netherlands, I would recommend July and August. So it's more the opposite, and that is also to do with the weather. Weather-wise, the tulip tours, of course, it's April, May, but it can be very chilly during the tulip tours. So if you're coming on the tulip tour, bring sweaters and gloves and hats and things like that, because it can be really chilly. Beautiful, but chilly. Yeah, so for the Netherlands, it doesn't really matter what time, although in July, August, it's a little more stable maybe for the weather. And the same for the Mosel, same for the Germany trips. You have more chance of a bit better weather if you stay a little bit in the middle, like from between May and September.
Got it. So is there anything I should have asked you about or something that you want to tell us about boat and bike tours that I have not talked about today?
No, I think we covered it all pretty much. Yeah.
It sounds great. Well, Tamara, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. You've been incredibly informative to help us kind of get an idea of what to expect on a boat and bike tour. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. It was very nice. And hope to see you on one of the trips.
You're going to, for sure. I hope you've enjoyed my conversation with Tammy. I've covered numerous boat bike tours on the show, and I'll put a link to all of them in the show notes. You can also check them out on the website where I go into more detail. Don't forget, you can email me to get the current Boat Bike Tours promo code. You can always reach me at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I always love hearing from you. And if you haven't done so already, please take a moment to hopefully rate this podcast with a 5-star review. I read them all and I enjoy the feedback. This show is for you, so your input is very, very valuable to me. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!